Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Reflecting the Way Radio. Saturn and the New Age Trojan Horse. I'm your host, Evan. Right at the top of the show here, I will remind you, if you haven't already done so, head over to our website, reflectingtheway.com. Don't forget to sign up for the email list there for all the latest updates and newest content. Also, head on over to our social media pages. We are at Reflect the Way on Twitter, and we are Reflecting the Way on Facebook. Follow us there, and you will have the inside line on new content releases and live shows. So, we'll jump right in here without any further ado. And if you've been following along in this series, then you'll know right where we're picking up. And if you haven't, I would highly recommend you go back and listen to or read up on the other entries in the series before you go any further, or this is really not going to make much sense to you at all. The link for the companion article to this episode is in the description box below. I would highly encourage you to read that as well. There will likely be more detail in the article than there is in this audio episode, but this should give you a pretty good starting place for those who prefer not to read. So, in the last section, we talked at a little bit of length about Masonry and the Masonic Tracing Board, and honestly, that particular article and episode took on a lot more of a metaphorical flavor than I thought it would, or hoped it would, or wanted it to, but it turns out that maybe wasn't such a bad thing. And we talked about the radiant eye above the two pillars, and the two pillars representing the bounds of our reality. And like I said, it came off as very metaphorical, and in some sense it is. Now, moving forward here, if you haven't thought we were on the crazy train, you'll probably be thinking that by the end of this episode. So, pass the tinfoil, fold yourself a hat, get it ready, because when we talked about that radiant eye, we talked about how it saturated this reality in a counterfeit sort of anti-light of death. And I don't want to rehash that. If you haven't listened to that or read that, go back and make sure you do that. You can get that audio either on Blog Talk Radio, or you can head over to the audio archive on reflectingtheway.com. We also have the companion article there. So I won't rehash that too much, but that particular section came off as metaphorical, all spiritual and kind of incorporeal, not having any sort of basis in physical reality, when the actual fact of the matter is that when we talked about the radiant eye projecting an anti-light that causes death, in fact, that is not strictly metaphorical. That is actually, at least in some sense, literal. Now, what follows here is maybe a bit touchy. I mentioned at the beginning of this series a number of months back that if you wandered off and did some of your own homework on this particular topic, you would quickly run into some very dark sort of New Age teaching. And the reason for that, in my estimation, is that the church, I'll put that in air quotes, the church has been so asleep at the switch for so long that the only place that you can uncover this information is to listen to the dark side speak. Now, the interesting thing here is in this particular instance, the dark side looks a lot like the light side in some aspects, where they will expose this Saturnian agenda and apparently give you a way out of the system, but it is actually a counterfeit way out. It is watch the birdie, look over here. And we're going to look at that a little bit. The content here is my attempt to kind of boil down the teaching or the research of what I consider New Age. I don't like that term, but I'll use it for familiarity's sake, It is my kind of version, my Jesusified version, if you like, of what I consider New Age and occult researchers. Now, those are researchers like, and I will give you the names, these are a couple or a few of them. There are more, but these are the big three that at least that I have pulled from recently. These researchers would be folks like Jordan Maxwell, David Icke, Michael Tazarian, and there are many others that will cover this topic, but those kind of are the three heavy hitters. And I do not recommend that you listen to them for curiosity's sake. I don't recommend you listen to them to try and get any sort of answers. I don't actually even recommend that you listen to them at all unless you're doing it with an intentionality and you know what you're in for, because they are silver-tongued and they are very good at presenting their case. And there is arsenic in with that message, if you take my metaphor. So this is kind of my version of what they're telling you, a little bit sterilized of what I consider to be fallen interpretation. Now, like I said, this is going to sound crazy, but that's okay. There's no easy way to broach this subject, so I'm going to just come right out and say it. Where on a Masonic tracing board, it is, we covered it in a sort of metaphorical kind of way where this eye projects this light into reality, and we're supposed to be the light in a world of darkness, and so on and so forth. Like I said before, that's not strictly metaphorical. It is actually also physical and literal if you take these sources at face value. Now, remember, Jesus said that the children of this world are wiser than the children of light in their generation, so obviously they know something. Do I necessarily agree with this? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. There's certain aspects of it that I certainly do agree with. There's some of it I don't know what to make of, and there's some of it that I have reservations about, but I will kind of leave that commentary out for now, and you can make up your own mind. So, what issue have I been skirting here and caveating? Well, the radiant eye, we talked about representing Lucifer, the light bearer, or in some sense Saturn. Now, if you look at these occult sources with an eye for facts rather than, an occult experience, let's say, if we're exposing the darkness, we have to look at the darkness, so be it. What they will tell you about this is that, now, like I said, some of this I agree, some of it I'm not sure, but I think there's something to this for sure. They will tell you that Saturn, the planet and the deity, is one of three things. It's either some sort of machine, some sort of prison for fallen entities, or it is itself a living being. And we're talking about the planet in the sky being one of those three or more than one of those three simultaneously. And what it's doing is projecting our reality onto the Earth. And many will go further and say that the moon is a repeater or a relay station for that signal. Now, this is NASA information, so take it with a grain of salt if you like. But Saturn is the only celestial body in our immediate vicinity, other than the sun, that gives off more energy than it receives. So there's something to the whole putting out energy thing that appears to be correct. Now, do I think the moon is a repeater or a relay station? I don't know, but there is certainly some high strangeness with the moon. One thing I'm fairly certain of is it's not just a hunk of rock in space. You can do some more research on that particular aspect if you like. I won't go there too much right now, but the crux of the matter is that these people believe that Saturn, the planet, is some sort of transmitter that transmits a signal or a field over Earth and gives us our reality. Now, there are numerous interpretations of what that means and what that looks like. Everything from our entire existence is a holographic projection and we are nothing but, sentience in the matrix, all the way to, this signal blankets Earth and tells plants when to bloom and seasons when to change and the sun when to come up. Now, to a certain degree, every theory on that spectrum, because it is a wide spectrum, has some kind of merit. Having said that, I do not believe we live in a strictly holographic reality. And I think if Saturn was beaming a signal down to Earth, it has better things to do than tell the plants when to bloom. But what I will say is, what you make of this is your business. But whatever that mechanism looks like, whether it's literal, physical, spiritual, metaphorical, the fact of the matter is the entity behind Saturn, whether it is the planet itself or some combination of the planet and a spiritual being or whatever, is projecting a field over humanity. And what I mean by that is, well, let me back up. It's hard, if not impossible, to prove that the planet itself casts this net over Earth. However, spiritually speaking, this is actually fairly obvious. All you have to do is take a step back and look. Now, let me ask you a question. We'll just take a little rabbit trail here. Paul in the New Testament and Jesus himself constantly say, "Fear not, be anxious for nothing. The Lord has not given you a spirit of fear. Take every thought captive, not just the bad ones." Why would he say that? Well, this is directly tied in to this system. Now, when I say spiritually Saturn is casting some kind of signal or field over humanity, why would it do that? Well, based on my knowledge of the dark side and my understanding of the Dark Lord, here's what I would say. The reason the New Testament constantly addresses fear, fear not, fear not, fear not, do not be anxious, do not worry, is because fear, especially, let's say primarily fear, but I will lump in all of the kind of based emotions and stuff like that, anger, rage, malice, impure sexual drives, all of those kind of instinctual sort of let's call them fleshly drives, the things that are kind of the animalistic side of you. This dark side entity feeds on that energy. Now, that is something that I completely buy, because it completely makes sense when you look at how often fear and negative emotions are addressed in especially the New Testament. Now, what's this field Saturn is casting? Okay, well, if we look back at the radiant eye, I said it was an anti-light of death. Now, what did I mean by that? If this is a literal physical projection over humanity, what I'm saying is the entity, the planet, whatever, either physically or spiritually, doesn't matter, it has the same ultimate effect, is casting a net over humanity that keeps you anxious, fearful, discontent, easily angered, all those animalistic sort of urges. This field drives you towards that. And you see the physical manifestation of this projection in things like the evening news. That's just a very simple example. This system is manifest simply by you going to work and having to fight for a promotion, or worry about a paycheck, or pay a mortgage, or be concerned about paying your bills, or fret about taxes. Money is a big part of this. Shameless plug, check out our couple of articles we have on money at Reflecting the Way. More on that there. But the entire world system we live in is a byproduct of this projection, whether spiritual or physical, is irrelevant. Now, this system is put in place, and this projection is cast over you for the simple purpose of keeping you in a lower level tier of emotional existence, if that makes any sense. It is to keep you down. It is to keep you away from the selfless emotions like love and compassion and empathy, and keep you operating in fear and anger and lust and all of those lower level emotions. Now, like I said, this entity literally feeds on this, right? Now, that might be a little bit hard to swallow, and I unpack this a little bit more in the article than I think I'm going to here. But the ultimate end game here is that this projection over our reality keeps you imprisoned. It keeps you a slave to your animal drives. Now, when you listen to, they're not mainstream researchers, but like the folks I mentioned here earlier in the show, like a David Icke or a Jordan Maxwell or a Michael Zarian, they tell you they have the answer on how to get out of this system. And in some sense, their answer to how to get out of this system is actually correct. It's the implementation and the interpretation that goes along with it that make their stance or their standard dangerous. Now, if base emotions and animal drives feed the beast, so to speak, if Saturn is siphoning life energy off of you, which is what it's doing through these systems and through this projection, keeping you down, sucking the life out of you, literally, if that's what it's doing through the animalistic drives and base emotions that it wants to keep you in, obviously, it doesn't take much of a rocket scientist to figure out that it's the higher level emotions that do not feed the beast. That's a very apropos sort of statement, feed the beast, that would see you break free of this system, right? Sort of, okay? So your love, your empathy, your compassion, your selfless, that whole godly, let's call it godly, right, for right now, godly set of traits or emotions is what can take you out of this system. And that's what the occult researchers will tell you. And technically, that's not wrong. Where this gets sticky is the implementation, because the love that they talk about is a selfish love. Selfishness is still feeding the beast. Now, we are told in the New Testament, I believe it was Jesus himself that said, perfect love casts out fear. And fear is the primary food source for this being. The operative word there is perfect love, not just any love, okay? The selfish love that is proposed by New Age or occult types is the all-accepting, never punishing, never uncomfortable sort of shallow love that never makes anything difficult or uncomfortable. Oh, I disagree with you, but I still love you and what you're doing because love, right? Perfect love is that parental type love that is, it has discipline. It can be uncomfortable when it needs to be to protect you from something. It is self-sacrificial to the point where if something is good for someone else, if you have this perfect love in you, if it's good for someone else and bad for you, you will still lay down your interests in the pursuit of helping others, right? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Even what appears to be self-sacrificial love can still be selfish. A self-sacrificial act can still be a selfish act, simply for the fact that if you are doing it to appease your conscience and nothing else, it's still selfish. Now, many of you listening will be of a Christian persuasion of some flavor, and you know where I'm going with this, that the Father's love is the only true perfect love, and by association, that is the love you need to exit this system. And we're going to cover that specifically. We're going to have an entire article and episode dedicated simply to escaping the matrix, if you like. Probably be the next article and episode in the series, so stay tuned for that. But so we won't park there much longer, except to say that the New Agers, they have the right idea, they have the wrong execution and the wrong understanding. That is fundamentally the difference between the truly redeemed and the truly deceived, I'm afraid. Now, just to go back a little bit here, I mentioned that Saturn in this vein of thinking can be either a machine, a living entity, or a prison for the fallen. I want to take a little bit of a stop there for just a minute and discuss that a bit, frankly, because I find it interesting. It has been speculated, and I think that's all we can say it is speculated, that CERN in Europe, the Large Hadron Collider, is in fact trying to open an electromagnetic bridge using Birkeland currents between Earth and Saturn. It is in some circles understood that Saturn is the prison in which some, all, or a combination of different fallen entities, but specifically the archons, are imprisoned. And there are certain factions that want to see them break out of prison. Okay? I'm going to come back to that. Another train of thought is that Saturn itself is a living entity. I'm not sure what I think about that one, to be honest. And the third train of thought is that the planet is itself a machine. That I find interesting, especially given the hexagonal-shaped storm on the North Pole. But make of that what you will. Given the fact it gives off more energy than it receives, it's certainly not just your average mundane planet. I mentioned there just a minute ago that it was a prison. Now, we've talked about the duality of the planet, the circle and the cube, time and space, and I want to park there for just a minute. And this is we're going to kind of wind her down here, but this is the crux of the issue. Prison that we are in, thanks to our animal drives and base emotions that is projected onto us by this entity, physical or spiritual, is irrelevant. The prison we are in is represented by the cube. Okay? The cube has 3 dimensions, height, width, and depth. That corresponds to our physical existence. It is our physical prison. It is a prison with no bars. You can't see the bars in front of you, but they are there. They're just invisible. Sounds stupid? Think about it for a while. It is the prison in which we are kept. Now, the prison of the fallen, if you think there's some merit to that theory, that the planet is a prison, it's commonly held that underneath the gaseous layer of Saturn is in fact literally a cube holding fallen entities. Do I think that's true? Don't know, frankly. But here's the other interesting thing. I pointed out the 9/11 memorial, I think 2 sections ago, which is basically a cube in a cube, like a black cube inside a black cube. And that is what's called a tesseract, a cube inside a cube. Interestingly enough, in Buddhism, not that I'm a Buddhist, mind you, little known fact in the West, Buddhism actually has its own version of hell. It's not just all daisies and reincarnation. They teach that if you're bad enough, there is still a hell to go to, and they call it Avicii, A-V-I-C-I, Avicii. And they teach that hell, or Avicii, is actually a cube under the earth. Now that's interesting, in my opinion, because that is kind of a cube, a prison cube inside of a greater prison cube, right? It's 2 layers deep, at least. Just an interesting side note there. You can't really hang your hat on it, but it's certainly interesting that there is a common belief between the East and the West. And one puts hell for humans as a cube inside the earth, and one puts the prison of the archons as a cube inside Saturn. And time is this cyclical thing represented by Saturn's rings. And ultimately, time, given enough of it, can destroy anything. It is what brings death, right? And we know that Saturn is represented by the Grim Reaper with the hourglass in his hand, right? Your time is running out. Now, the question is, if we're stuck in this cube, if we're stuck in the box, it sure gives the meaning think outside the box or don't put God in a box. Sure gives that a whole new meaning. If we're stuck in this box, there's a problem. Because we can love as selflessly as we want and be as empathic as we want and as compassionate as we want. But the fact of the matter is, a cube is closed on 6 sides. Has a top, it has a bottom, has a left side, a right side, a front side, and a back side. So, how are you getting out? And herein lies the real issue with the New Age teaching, is you can ascend right to the top of that box so that you can taste the rim, but you can't get past the ceiling because all the sides are sealed. So in order to get out of this box, out of this prison, you need somebody or something to crowbar the prison bars apart, peel the lid off the box, and allow you to escape, right? To bring this back to the Masonic tracing board, everything between the pillars represent the bounds of this prison. Everything outside is outside of this prison. But we are stuck inside until such a time as we find something or someone that can pry the prison open to escape. And that will be the topic of the next section in this series, exclusively. But the crux of the matter is, it doesn't matter how good you think you are, how selfless you actually are, how loving you truly are. I'm not questioning anybody's sincerity by any means. But the fact of the matter is, if you're operating in your own power without the keys to the cell, you are perpetually stuck in this reality and in this prison without some outside force to pry it open. Think about that. There is no way out unless the box is open enough for you to get out. Now, something else that maybe I should have put in a little bit sooner, this is kind of going to be an awkward way to end, but this will be kind of my final thought, is this projection not only keeps you operating on a certain set of feelings, emotions, and drives, but it also limits your perceptible reality, in my understanding. I don't believe it creates reality, but I do believe it limits your perception of the reality around you. What I mean by that is it limits the spectrum in which you can see. It limits the auditory range in which you can hear. It limits all your senses so that they're dull. And there is a way to circumvent that. There's actually 2 ways to circumvent that. One is fallen, one is unfallen. The fallen way, we may touch on this in some greater detail, can have you, again, ascend to the heights of the ceiling of this prison. But you can never exceed the ceiling, and you can never move outside the box. You can only ever perceive what's in the box, because you are stuck in the box, inside Saturn's cube. The holy way out, strangely enough, looks like the fallen way. Or maybe more accurately, the fallen way looks like a mirrored image of the holy way. And your perception, in both cases, will expand. But ultimately, it's the end goal. One sees you out of the box, looking in, and one sees you in the box, trying to look out. And with that thought, I think we will end it tonight. And I will say that if this has piqued your interest at all, be sure and read that article because there's more there. I would also say if you're going to venture off and look into this on your own, I won't discourage you from doing it, but I will caution you that there is some inherent danger in doing so. Make sure you know what you're wading into and make sure your foundations are secure. So with that, I will leave you, and blessings.